Chris, how you doing?
How you doing, man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you on. I've been listening to your podcast for a long time. Your podcast game, I have to tell you, is just next level. You're probably one of those podcasters I listen to who just put so much effort into producing your episodes that we're just blown away, and you try to model after. And there's no wonder why you're growing so fast right now. But I suppose for many of our fellow audience, especially young audience from Asia, who might not be familiar with what you do, how do you normally introduce yourself to people?
So I am a podcaster and YouTuber. I was a club promoter for a very long time. I ran one of the biggest events companies in the UK. And toward the end of my 20s, kind of had a little quarter-life crisis, realized that I wasn't perhaps fulfilling myself in the way that I should do. So now I talk to people smarter than me on the internet, and whatever version of the simulation that we are living in gets to call that a job.
Would you also call yourself a modern day philosopher?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely not. The closest, the best that I could get would be bro philosopher, I think. But I have no credentials at all to have philosopher, intellectual. Someone called me a pseudo intellectual the other week, and I felt complimented. So yeah, the bar is set quite low.
The vibe that you give off, it's if let's say Jordan Peterson is like the father figure you never had. You have this like a big bro figure that people could use.
I'll take that. Yeah, I've managed to make a career so far out of being the most stupid person in every conversation. So that's it seems to be working well up to now.
Your background is quite interesting, and I think you're also, I mean, quite being humble, but you're also a model, right? And you used to be on TV shows. So are you still promoting nightclubs, or is that sort of like in your previous life?
Yeah, I exited that business middle of last year.
Oh, okay.
I gave that back to my business partner, and that was really fun. I found doing nightlife to be very useful at learning how a business works. You are exposed to marketing, HR, B2B,
Right,
B2C.
right.
You have to deal with customer complaints. You have to understand advertising, social media trends. You've got to do networking. It was just a baptism of fire for me. So yeah, I'm from the northeast of the UK, a very normal, very working class town. I'm an only child, which I think shaped my upbringing quite a lot. It gave me some massive advantages and also some challenges as well. And that was kind of the life that I knew. It was relatively insulated up until the age of about 18 when I went away to university. And then I got to uni, sat down, had spent all of my money drinking during the first week of uni, which maybe even in Asia, some of the students, the fellow students, will be able to feel my pain. And I needed to earn some money. So the guy that I sat next to, I said, look, I've spent everything. I've spent all of my money in the first week. And he said, well, why don't you come with me to this meeting later on? You can get a job flyering for nightclubs. I went there, and that guy that said you should come with me and get a job flyering 15 years later was still my business partner. That was the guy that I sold the business back to last year. So a groomsman at his wedding. We've been best friends ever since, basically. And then, like I say, you roll on. I did everything that a young guy in the West, and maybe in the East, I'd be interested to know how this sort of ties across, but everything that a young guy is told that he should take value in. So followers on Twitter and Instagram, and being tagged at the right events, and bottles in nightclubs, and girls and money and freedom and kind of like hedonism and stuff. And it was fun. Don't get me wrong, dude. It was a really, really fun way to spend my 20s. And, me back then was having a whale of a time. However, as I did more and more things that I felt like should have given me satisfaction, and they didn't satisfy me, I started to question whether or not the route that I was going down was the right one. So I went on reality TV twice. I was the first person through the doors of the UK's biggest reality TV show, Love Island. I got a blue tick on Instagram and free charcoal toothpaste, and got invited to parties and got to do all that stuff. And I was a commercial male model for many years, like you say, over a decade, modeling for brands like Reebok and Nike. I was a DJ. I got to headline my own shows. I got to run nightclubs and be the person stood out front that everybody knew. And yet, toward the end of my 20s, something was missing. And it was a very fortunate time for me. Guys like Jordan Peterson, Jocko Willink, Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, Alain de Botton from the School of Life. A lot of these very interesting, insightful thinkers were coming to the forefront, and they were saying, maybe you should consider thinking about things that I'd never thought about before. Stuff like telling the truth or leaning into discomfort as opposed to leaning away from it. Being attractive to many women but choosing just one as opposed to being attractive to many women and choosing all of them. And all of these different insights really spoke to me. And that was kind of the kickstart, I think, that dragged me out of that adult, infant, man-child life that I'd managed to be very successful at. And you know, I don't know how much this resonates with people across in the East, but this is a very, very common, I call it the manopause, toward the end of the 20s that guys feel. Very common. A lot of guys resonate with this, that they thought the things that all of their friends and society told them they should be satisfied in weren't making them as happy as they expected it to, and they then start to ask themselves questions like, well, what do I want to do with my life?
I have two thoughts on this. Number one, how somebody who looks like you, probably many people are questioning, like, what do I have possibly in common with this like a model-looking guy who would look like he just pretty much cruised through everything in life? Maybe in their mind, you just had everything handed to you on silver platter. And you know, maybe they understand that it's hard for them to process what kind of struggles you could have possibly had even in your childhood. That's number one. Number two, it is absolutely true that these days, even I feel looking around, that people are lacking that sense of purpose, and maybe as a result you start losing hope. And you're just, especially in Asian culture, like it's not just in Korea, but maybe in China, Japan, India, in the Philippines, you know, you're just told that there are certain paths that you should pursue, whether it's from your parents or by society. And, you know, as men, you really have to kind of forge your own path, but it's very difficult, whether it's because of your social conditioning or your parental pressure. You know, you don't really see that many guys trying to take risks and, you know, just give it a shot as something that you're passionate about. So I think that's something we can certainly get into a little bit of discussion about.
Absolutely, yeah, man. So I mean, when you talk about challenges and stuff, I understand that somebody that appears to have gone from one success to another in adult life might be difficult to resonate with, because you think, well, this person's had everything handed to them. Look at the jobs that they've gone through or the follow account or whatever. But yeah, you know, to roll it back, I kind of glazed over the first 18 years of my life. But I grew up in like I say, a very working class town in the northeast of the UK that was famous only for having the highest teen pregnancy rating in all of England. Which even then it lost that, so it wasn't even still number one at getting teenagers pregnant. And I didn't really fit in. I don't have the accent of the place that I'm from. I was an only child, and childhood was different for me. It was a challenge in some ways. I struggled to connect with other kids. I spent a lot of time on my own. I mentioned that there is a double-edged sword, I think, to growing up in solitude. And one of the really amazing advantages that it gives you is the ability to strike out on your own, to not be scared of backing yourself to go and do something. And I adore my ability to sit in solitude. But the price that I paid for that was a lot of loneliness as a kid, that I was playing in my room on my own, listening to audio tapes on my own. I didn't have really any friends at school for the first 16 years, which is up until we go to what we call college in the UK, but would be high school in America. And yeah, it was tough. You know, it was a formative period that I'm very glad didn't leave a chip on my shoulder about the rest of the world. And I wonder whether if I'd been born 20 years later and I grew up, and now I'm 35 now, if I was 15 now and suffering with this isolation and feeling lonely, but the world of TikTok and Reddit and Discord and 4chan was available to give me other communities of disenfranchised young men, I wonder what sort of communities and beliefs and ideologies I would have hooked myself into.
Right.
Because at the time, I didn't see myself as part of some movement of dispossessed young men. What I saw myself as was just a person that didn't really understand how to connect with other people. I hadn't learned the social skills that I needed particularly well, which meant that I was kind of inexperienced to the point where it was hard for me to make friends. And that was it. You know, there was bullying, teasing, a lot of teasing, and a lot of loneliness. And, you know, I've avoided for almost all of the podcast up until about 6 months ago when I sat down with David Goggins. I didn't bother to even really bring this up. I felt a combination of ashamed, nervous, kind of guilty of even thinking that it might be something bad because, you know, I wasn't sexually abused. I wasn't, you know, I didn't have my arm broken. I wasn't stabbed. I wasn't run over with a car. And I have friends who have been from ethnic minorities in different areas of the UK for whom that has happened to them. So I'm going, well, you know, what is it for me to say that my experiences were so difficult? Just, you know, man up and get on with it, which is obviously a part of a challenge that guys have with opening up about their emotions. But yeah, you know, for the people who maybe think that I had everything handed to me on a platter, it was a baptism of fire throughout my early years, I guess. And yeah, off the back of that, I had a bunch of advantages that were earned through the discomfort that I'd gone through, I guess.
Can I ask how you were bullied or teased exactly?
Like minor physical stuff. Well, minor. I mean, getting into scraps, being pushed around a lot. It was a lot of social bullying, I guess I would call it. I would have always been reminded that I was the bottom of the pile. I would have always been the kid that would have been ostracized, that would have been picked on, that would have been left out at every single last point. That's sometimes manifested in physical bullying, maybe once a week, something like that. It would have happened. I don't know whether that's a lot or not. I only have my own experience to go on. And yeah, there was a period throughout, I think, age 13 to 14, where there was a history teacher, Mrs. Wilkinson, who took pity on me, and she could tell that I didn't have many friends. And I think my mum might have written her a letter or something like that. And I remember one day I was doing PE, physical education for us, and she'd sent another student with a piece of paper, and this piece of paper was stapled together. I was like, what on earth is this? And it was from Mrs. Wilkinson. This student came and brought it to me at the end of my PE lesson and said, Mrs. Wilkinson said that I have to give you this. So I opened it up, and obviously it had been stapled so that nobody else could open it. And it was opened up, and she said, if you want to come and spend your lunchtimes in my classroom, I'll just be eating my lunch and you can play on the computer and you can kind of be here. But I guess, you know, given the fact that you're spending 6 lessons in school back to back with a 1 hour break for lunch, the fact that the most comfortable place I could find to be was in another classroom for another hour on my own, maybe speaks volumes to how comfortable I felt being out in the playground at large.
Wow. I mean, that's kind of nice of her, though. You know.
Oh, dude, I really need to message her. It's on my to-do list to find her somehow. I don't know her first name, so it's going to be difficult, but I really want to find her and say thank you, because I very much appreciate that she did for me.
I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to this a lot. I mean, I would say I was subjected to that kind of, I suppose, bullying myself growing up. But then, like, how does that kind of make you feel? Because, you know, at that age, what was sort of like your, when you think about your own future and what you want to be, did you have any kind of ambition, or, oh, I wish I could be doing this, you know, I can totally see myself doing that? Or were you just like, oh man, how was your level of self-confidence at that point?
0. No self-confidence at all. It had been completely whittled out of me. Unbelievably self-conscious, unbelievably self-doubting, had a very negative inner voice as well. Would have not believed that I could have gone on to do anything. I didn't have goals. I didn't have some grand plan. I wish I could tell you that I had this sort of flaming sword of stoic determinism that just made me, I knew at that point I was going to succeed and the bullies were going to be pieces of shit and it was all going to be fine. No, I can't say that that was the way it was. I just muddled through one day after another, and I was not massively exposed to the world. That's why the introduction of the internet, and when I started to make more friends at college and I got my first job, I really flourished because I got to learn. I was so keen to learn about the world because I hadn't got to learn that through not having siblings and then through not really having friends and not being exposed to a massive number of other things. And then I got toward my 16, 17 years old and I started to get some social circles moving. And I was just so hungry to learn about the world. I remember one of my friends moved away to a different city and he was at university and I would have been 17, he would have been 18 and he'd moved away to Manchester and I was still in Teesside. And I was messaging him on MSN Messenger and I would ask him, tell me what you can see outside of your window, because I just wanted to imagine somewhere else. I just wanted to think about a different place, a different world. Even at that point, I think I just loved the idea of adventure, new things, new people, new places. And that lit a fire under me. Even though I didn't know, that was probably the beginning of what would nearly 20 years later be ditching my entire life and moving from the UK to America.
So was there any like particular trigger point where you realized that, oh, wow, I really need to get my social skills under my belt and then and try to actively improve on that, whether it be, I don't know, talking to some cute girls or like, you know, try to befriend the coolest guy or something like that?
Certainly not at school or at college, but as soon as I got to university, everyone will remember this, right? During your summer holidays, you get to go away from school and then you come back and you have the opportunity to reinvent yourself. Exactly. It's like, I'm going to be the skater kid this year. I'm going to be the rock kid. I'm going to be the cool kid. And for me, leaving college and going to university was the ultimate version of that, because I got to leave. I'd already left a good chunk of the expectations from school to college behind. And then I got to do that all over again and go from college to university. And I got to basically turn up there and start a complete fresh. And this time I had friends. I had people that needed me because of the club nights that I was running. And, you know, I'd embedded myself right in the middle of these social circles. So I'd created a world where even if people didn't like me, and they maybe very well could have done, I was a much more socially adept person by 18, 19, 20, 21. But they needed me. If they wanted to get into VIP, if they wanted to speak to the cute girls, if they wanted to get in quicker or cheaper, or if they wanted a bottle of champagne or a table for their friend's birthday, they needed me. And that was almost as good as them wanting me. So I'd managed to leverage myself into this position.
But then how do you go on to become such a successful club promoter? Is there sort of strategy? Is it just because, you know, you have to grow your network, but you got to start with zero, right? So, or at least one.
Correct. Yeah. So one of the advantages of always being on the outside of social groups is it's very easy to look at how they work. So I used to get obsessed when I was at school by the way that kids would tie their ties, or the type of shoes that they would wear, or the shoulder that they would carry their bag on, or the type of haircut that they would have. Because I would be certain that that would be the reason that they were popular and I wasn't, that was why they had friends and I didn't, that was why they seemed confident and I wasn't. But it wasn't that. It was just social skills. Right? It was perfectly normal social skills. However, the advantage of being on the outside and looking in means that you don't get corrupted by the groupthink and by all of the different biases. You're able to observe social groups happening and you can manipulate them much more effectively. Now, manipulate is a little bit of a nasty term. I'm getting people to go to a night out, right? Like, I'm not getting them to join some far right, like, militant arm of the British like government. But it was easy. It was easy for me. I found I was driven. I really wanted to be successful at something. I'd always wanted success. I just didn't even know that I wanted it. And then I had the opportunity to dedicate myself to something. I am quite obsessive about the work that I do. I take a lot of pride in doing it correctly. And again, all of these things that had made me, as a kid, super like weird. Why am I obsessing over the haircut or the tie or the shoes or the shoulder of the bag? But then when you just move the angle of that energy a tiny little bit to a world where you can apply that to a business, where you can apply that level of detail and resolution to building a brand or to creating networks or to doing whatever it is that you need to do in order to improve yourself in terms of self-development, that's really useful.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things, for the young guys and girls that are listening who feel lost, feel like they have the raw materials to do something special, but as of yet haven't manifested that. You don't know where those raw materials are going to take you in future. And sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to sift those out so that the environment that you're in can fully allow you to deploy those skills moving forward. Like, I wasn't, in terms of my disposition, massively different at 16 as I was at 21, but the world around me had changed and the skill set I had changed. And it was that same energy that allowed me to punch through and become really successful. So yeah, beware the kids that you bully when you're in school, because a lot of the time those are the ones that are going to end up being pretty useful and you're going to need to get VIP off in 5 years.
I wonder, even at that point, do you think that if those bullies or the people who used to make fun of you, did you have a chance to go back to your hometown, let's say, and then just interact with those guys at any point?
No, so not really, basically. Most of them didn't go to college. So the school that I went to was pretty low down, and I would have been one of maybe 10% of people to 20% of people there would have gone to college, and even less would have gone to university. So very, very low number. 10 to 20% would have gone on. Yeah, a lot of people that would have been there would have gone to an apprenticeship or just started working straight away. So it was very much not an academic school. Yeah, I didn't go back and go to the school reunion and stand there and lord it over. There was a school reunion actually that I was too busy to attend, which, to be honest, as far as I can see, is the best way to be. I was getting on with my life.
Right,
I didn't have anything to prove. There was periods where a bunch of people would come up to Newcastle, which was the biggest city. That was where I'd gone to uni, and they would need guest lists. So I'd get a message on Facebook or MySpace or whatever, and they would want to, oh, can you help me out with such and such? It was never from any of the bullies, but I did have one message. This was a story that I told David Goggins a few months ago. I did an article for the BBC, an interview halfway through last year, and it reached a lot of people. It reached about 2 million people. And in it, that was the first ever time that I really properly opened up about bullying in school. And I got a message in my Instagram DM requests, right in the deep, dark depths of it. And it was from a guy, and it was tons and loads of messages long, like hundreds of characters, thousands of characters long, massive, massive message. And he said, Chris, you might not remember me, but I bullied you in school. And me and my wife have got a daughter, and she's about to go to school. She's 4 years old. And we started talking about what sort of a student and a friend and a person we want this child to be. And it made me reflect on my time at school. And I'd been thinking for a while that I wanted to message you. We'd been having these discussions. It caused me sleepless nights thinking about the way that I'd behaved. And then I read this article on the BBC, and I just had to reach out. I don't expect a reply from you. I don't even know if you're going to see this. I'm happy to see that you seem to be happy, but I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry. And that message was so meaningful to me. I barely remembered the guy's name. My mum did. When I messaged my mum about it, my mum remembered his name, but I didn't, not properly. And I replied and said, look, man, I absolutely forgive you. If whatever it is that you have gone through and that I went through when I was in school has meant that your daughter is the sort of person that's not only not going to be a bully, but is going to stand up to bullies and is going to stop other children from being bullied in school, I call that like an absolute win, and I would happily pay the price that I paid in order for that to be the outcome that we get.
Wow.
So yeah, a very meaningful message that I'll cherish for a long time.
Oh man, that's a beautiful ending, so to speak, because I know for a fact that forgiving people is just one of the hard things to do, especially if it caused you that much of a heartache, and then Also, I mean, we see like even when it comes to like mass shootings or even in a type of like violence, there's like popular Korean, Netflix series that's all focused on this like bullying issue, and then people they just go on this like revenge type of thing, and it becomes this like a vicious cycle, right? So for you to say, yeah, listen, it's all for your daughter, pretty much, and just to cut that vicious cycle, I think it's quite
Correct.
Yeah, I think it's quite nice. One thing the word that you said that really stood out to me, and I'm just kind of curious about this in general. You said that you had this obsessive personality, and it just so happens that's just one of my favorite catchphrases or word that, I think in order for you to be anything, even just to be successful at your job, you've got to have that obsessive personality where you just don't take no for an answer, and then you try to get better and improve. And the question that I have for you, as well as for a lot of people, is that something you're born with? That having that obsessive personality, having that grit, just having that never giving up attitude, is that something that gets shaped by your childhood, or is it just something in your DNA?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I spent a lot of time over the last couple of years looking at behavioral genetics.
Right,
so for the
right.
people who aren't familiar, behavioral genetics is the study of heritability, how much of your behavior as it manifests in the real world, things like personality, disposition, etc., how much of that is due to genes from your parents and how much of that is due to your environment. So it's the nature-nurture debate, but it's for all the fluffy stuff. It's not height, it's not eye color, it's not shoe size, it's not like musculature, it's other things. And I find it fascinating. On average, 50% of everything that you are psychologically is due to genetics, on average. Some of them are much more, some of them are a little bit less, but everything has a very, very large component of genetics. So for me to say that my obsession or obsessive personality is exclusively generated by my own will is rubbish. It's total rubbish. A big chunk of this is raw materials that I was given by the mixture of mum and dad that they decided to give to me. And I can see that in them too. You look at your parents and you see in them the shadows of your own self, or at least the raw materials that it was made. No one is not like their parents at all. You can't be. It's impossible.
Right.
At least in terms of your nature. That's not to say that you can't rebel, stick your middle finger up at them and say, I'm going to go and do it my own way.
Right.
So it's interesting that you talk about the obsession thing in terms of success. It's a double-edged sword again, man. Like, we want to have a life which is balanced. We want to have a life where we can take time off, where we don't feel like we need to always be on the grind. And yet the modern world has valorized success so much that we will be prepared to burn ourselves every single day in an attempt to achieve it. There is no price too high to pay if success is what you get at the end of it. That's the way that the world, that's what it teaches us. And there was an interesting study that my friend Alex Hormozy taught me about, which was the 3 most common traits of highly successful people. The first one is that they all have a superiority complex. The second one is that they all have crippling insecurity. And the third one is that they have very strong impulse control. So the superiority complex allows you to believe that you are better than everybody else. You can go and take large risks. You have high amounts of self-confidence. The crippling insecurity means that you have something to prove to the world, that you are terrified of being a failure. And then the impulse control narrows your focus toward that. So the impulse control, I think, is where the obsession comes in a lot. And the crippling insecurity and the impulse control maybe blend together a little bit, that the obsession would be, if I don't do X, then I am worse of a person, I am not worthy, I am lesser, etc., etc. It's almost kind of like a superstition. You hear about these sports players that first they got to put the left sock, then the right sock, then the left boot, then the right boot, then they've got to touch the door 3 times on the way out. Like, it's almost a little bit like that, but it's kind of a psychological version. But the interesting thing about those 3 most common traits is that none of them, except for impulse control, and even impulse control taken to the extreme isn't enjoyable. Superiority complex on its own, not very admirable at all. Crippling insecurity, no one wants that. And unbelievably high impulse control, good, but can cause you to be so obsessive and tunnel vision focused that you could maybe forget things like spending time with your family, allowing time to not burn out, etc., etc. And this is something that I've been thinking about so much recently, and it's the tension between success and the desire to feel like we're enough.
Right.
So presumably the reason that we want success is because we think that a more successful life will bring us more happiness, more meaning, more fulfillment. But the problem is we sacrifice the thing that we want, which is happiness, for the thing which is supposed to get it, which is success. We sacrifice the thing we want, happiness, for the thing which is supposed to get it, which is success. So you go, hang on. So you're telling me in order to get the thing that the entire world tells me that I should get, success, that I need to have a superiority complex, crippling insecurity, and maniacal focus. Also, I need to sacrifice happiness in order to achieve success so that when I have enough success, I can finally be happy. Like, all of those things just seem so backwards. So I'm really, really trying at the moment to let go as much as I can on some of the preconceptions I have around what success means, about how I'm supposed to get it, about the fact that it is an unambiguously admirable, desirable trait. Well, hang on. If the price of success is everything, maybe there's a quicker way to get to happiness.
It's a very interesting thing to think about. But then again, I suppose my 2 cents on this issue is that I kind of separate out the happiness from your sense of being fulfilled because you're driven towards a certain mission. So of course it comes at a lot of personal sacrifice, your happiness, but ultimately, because you're living this purpose. And I don't know if many people can even relate to this, but it's almost like I have this like life's mission to do this for the rest of my life, which is Asian boss and trying to bring some sort of positive impact on humanity. That kind of like, yeah, I think this is okay. I'm not like happy, but
Let me give you a really, really great question that I got from Mark Manson. So the guy that wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, fantastic author, really, really competent guy. And he said, the best question to ask yourself in life is not what do you want? It's which pain are you willing to endure? Because life is going to come with pain. If you want to do anything which is great, you're going to have to suffer some sort of pain. So choose it. Choose which pain you want. Right? And what you're talking about there is really, really important. And you're totally right that there is a difference between happiness and meaning, right? So Daniel Kahneman and Daniel Gilbert, 2 fantastic, epic psychologists, both from America, they both discuss the difference between these 2. So you can imagine Daniel Gilbert, the hedonist, says that true happiness and a life well lived would be one where each individual moment was maximizing happiness. So it would be you laid on a lilo with your favorite cocktail 24 hours a day for the rest of time. So each individual moment would be happiness. Now, in retrospect, maybe you could have spent your time better and maybe you didn't contribute to the world all that much, but it doesn't matter. Like, each individual moment was happy. Now, Daniel Kahneman would say happiness is a life which in retrospect you're glad that you lived, even if each individual moment itself wasn't necessarily maximizing happiness. In retrospect, you look back and you reflect and you think, yeah, that was right. That was what I should have done. I feel satisfied. And I'm very much of the latter camp. I'm very much of the meaning camp rather than the happiness camp. I don't have a massive hedonistic streak in me. What I've come to believe about this is it is almost exclusively your personal disposition that determines where on this spectrum you should lie. So if you are the kind of person that reflects a lot, that does a lot of introspective work, that asks yourself questions around meaning and purpose, that checks in on where you're moving toward and what sort of contribution you're having to the world, you need to be leaning more toward meaning. If you're someone that quite perfectly can exist in the moment, that can enjoy simple things, that is able to be a little bit more on the hedonistic side, then you don't need to quite so much. You're basically overcomplicating life and sacrificing happiness in order for meaning when you're not optimized for that. So that's how I personally have come to measure this. Now, as I'm getting older, I'm trying to bring more hedonistic happiness, not going back to my club promoting days, but more Lilo and on a beach type thing, at least a little bit. But yeah, I think that's very important, and I'm glad that you brought that distinction up. I think that those two are very important. But the question, what pain do you want to endure, is a very worthwhile one to ask.
And you're saying that personal disposition, maybe some people are naturally more oriented towards meaning versus simple hedonistic happiness. That
100%.
That personal disposition, you're saying it's almost like 50% nature, 50% nurture?
I would say so, yeah. Now, that's not to say that you can't change it.
Right.
But we like what we like. And we like it, why? Well, we don't know, which is exactly the challenge. You can get yourself to want certain things. You can change certain desires, but there are some people who for the rest of their life will love to do fitness. All that they want to do is be fit and be in shape. And there will be other people for whom that isn't a priority. Why? Well, just because humans are different, right?
Yeah. So kind of going back to your nightclub promoter days, would you say at that point you felt like you were enough? That, you know what, I'm doing okay. I've made a lot of progress in how I interact with other people. My social skills are through the roof. Now I'm getting some external validation from all these cool people. And so most people would think that, okay, well, or did you still have that much of a imposter syndrome? I'm like, oh man, only if they found out who I really was. At that point, where were you?
Yeah, I was very much still in imposter syndrome mode. I, from the outside, probably looked like I had it all together. Was having relationships that I was very happy in, was making money, was well known, had lots of people that required my attention. But there was something going on, and I didn't really understand it. I was trying to find out who I was. I was trying to work out, who am I really? And I was playing a role of being this big name on campus, party boy, club promoter person, because that was the first thing in my life that I'd ever found acceptance and success in. So I thought, well, if I work as hard as possible at this thing, maybe I can continue to be loved and accepted. But that doesn't mean that it's right. That just means that you're good at it, right? You're just effective at playing the role. And this is one of the things that I've learned since then, that if you're only playing a role, any compliments that you get and any love that you receive from the world will never hit you existentially. You're never going to feel it in your heart. You'll feel it in your head. You'll go, oh, wow, thank you that was a nice compliment. But it'll never resonate with you. You'll never feel like it really touches your soul. And the reason is that you are 1 degree removed from the thing which is being praised, right? If somebody says that they love me, and the me that they love is club promoter Chris,
Right.
who has created this contrived personality, even if I didn't know that I was doing this, I'm me inside, the thing that's inside of all of that isn't going to feel that. I'm not going to feel that love. And I think my post-mortem on that period of my life is that was what was going on, that I had lots of success, but I didn't have much love, even though I was being given love by the world. And the reason was that I wasn't showing up truly, honestly, openly, vulnerably. I wasn't being my true self. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know what my true self was. So yeah, man, you can be alone in a crowd and hollow in victory, despite having all of the trappings of success in the world, if you're not fully aligned with what it is that you're doing. And I really hope, and it's one of the things I've tried to do with Modern Wisdom, my podcast, I really, really hope that people can be woken up from a life where they're either successful or not successful. It doesn't really matter. But if you're not living in alignment, no matter how much success you achieve, it's never going to feel satisfying to you.
Yeah. Your story reminds me a lot of another guy that I really look up to. Kind of have a similar nightclub promoter background. His name is Scott Harrison, and he's actually a founder of Charity Water. And I don't know if you know who he is, but he just gave, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best keynote speeches like ever. And we actually had the privilege of interviewing him when he visited Seoul, South Korea. This guy's, I think he literally raised $300 million for his charity, utilizing his skills, and his mission is to provide clean, drinkable water to everybody on the planet. And so he used that money to provide the transparency that charity needs in order to make true impact. And yeah, he talks a lot about how he really hit the rock bottom when he was this one of the top club promoters in New York, and you know, he was doing drugs and he just felt so morally bankrupt. So I'm just wondering if you also, similar to Scott, hit that sort of low point in that hedonistic lifestyle that kind of makes you question, like, man, what am I doing with my life? Or was it sort of a gradual process for you to just snap out of that?
So for me, if Scott hit rock bottom, I hit rock top. And right. I'd finally managed to get myself onto this massive reality TV show. It was all that anybody was talking about. And I came off and had all of these invites to parties and stuff. But what had happened was I'd spent a month basically living in a villa with TV cameras on me 24 hours a day, and a bunch of people around me that were the person that I was pretending to be. These were genuinely extroverted, professional party boys and party girls. But for once, I didn't have anywhere that I could hide. And even now, man, looking back, I used to, because it got to the stage with the events where I was the director of the events company, so I didn't need to work. I could just tell the managers to go and run everything. I'd check in, make sure everything was going okay. I'd go back to my car and watch podcasts. So I'd sit in my car and watch the event, observe it from the outside. Now, if you were to say you're a 27-year-old guy who owns one of the biggest events companies in the UK, every single person either needs you or knows you, you own an army of 500 to 1,000 members of staff that all work for you. You've got 2 to 3 club nights that are sold out every single week, and 50% of the customers are women. Why are you going and sitting in your car and listening to podcasts? Are you insane? So there was already murmurings. There was already something going on where I was like, this isn't just quite right. But it wasn't because I was sniffing my way into an early grave, which it sounds like maybe that was Scott's story. So I do this Love Island thing. I spend all of this time, but for once, I can't go and hide in my car. There's nowhere for me to go to. I don't have YouTube or books or friends or the internet. I don't have any distractions at all because everything's taken away from you and it's just you and these people. And it was a fatal dose of contrast between the person that I thought I was and these people who genuinely were the person I was pretending to be. And that was really the sort of beginning. It was the pebble at the top of the avalanche. I'm not going to say, and then I looked up and the skies opened and I realized I was meant to be a podcaster. Like, that's not the way it worked. But it made me think, right, there is a problem here. You thought that these were your people. You thought that this was the place that you were supposed to be. Something is not right. You need to go and do some self-work. And that was a really useful beginning at identifying something was wrong, and I needed to do some introspection to fix it.
It sounds like you really had that self-awareness even at that point, as opposed to just going down the world of like drugs and sex. And I
spent a good bit of time in that world, but I came back out again.
Okay. Right. So now that you start having these moments of, oh, you know what, maybe there's something more to this, then what were the next steps?
Yeah, so I decided to go traveling a lot, which I hadn't been able to do because of the business for pretty much all of my time. So I went to Thailand, I went to Bali, I went to America a ton. I started to fall in love with different cultures, and I started meditating. I read, but I found it, even that, dude, it was so unglorious and unceremonial and riddled with failure that I couldn't read half a page of a book. I'd spent so long just using WhatsApp and messaging people and flicking between social media. my focus didn't allow me to read half of a page. I couldn't sit down. My body would make little movements because it was trying to get itself used to this lower level of stimulus, where I've gone from a full color phone that bings and bongs and I can swipe through to just this piece of paper with like black squiggles on it. And I have to try and get my focus. But I knew that was something I cared about. I was very fortunate. Like I said, Jordan Peterson, Rogan, Sam Harris, Alain de Botton, etc., all of these different interesting thinkers. So I'm listening to a lot of them, just crushing volumes of content, consuming anything and everything that I could, really falling in love with that kind of messaging, and trying to develop any kind of insight about me. And meditation was a big part of that. I developed a really great morning routine that involved a good bit of breath work, a good bit of meditation, and some reading that I could sit down for a little while. I went sober. Not that alcohol was ever a problem for me. I wasn't that big of a drinker, but I did some focused periods of sobriety. And again, for anybody that's listening that thinks, I really want to make a strong change, and you're young and you're still partying, just take 6 months off drinking. Do 6 months of sobriety, and I promise you, the person that you see on the other side of that is going to be transformed. You will supercharge your progress. You will get between 1 and 2 years of progress in 6 months.
Wow.
If you just go sober. If you're a normal, in my opinion, yes, because
what do you
save
like a brain chemistry wise, why do you think just giving up drinking is just that beneficial to your progress?
It's a global improvement because everything starts to compound. So you no longer waste days being hungover, which everybody's done. The days when you're hungover, you don't hit your habits, which resets your habit streak, which means that on maybe day 3 or 4 after the night out, you then have to use an ungodly amount of motivation to get the meditation going again, or to get back to the gym, or to do the whatever thing, right? Like no one stuck to their diet on a hangover, ever. No one's ever stuck to their diet. So you improve all of your habits, you improve your consistency, you have more time because you're not wasting that day. So there's one day out of 7 or one day out of 14 that you've literally just given yourself back. Everybody has problems. There's not enough time in the day to do the things I want to do. I can't believe how busy I am. And no one thinks twice about spending half a day or a full day hungover on the couch watching Netflix. Well, look, there is the opportunity for you to gain this back. Then as you start to roll this a little bit further forward, you question, who are the friends that I've got? Do I have friends or do I have drinking partners? What are the events that I'm attending? Do I need to drink in order to sedate myself because of how boring all of these events are that I'm going to? So you start to ask those sorts of questions. And then over time, as you get toward sort of maybe month 2 into month 3, all of this begins to compound together. And I found an unbelievable improvement in cognitive speed. I was much more mentally agile. I had a lot more pride. The story that I told myself about who I was and the framing around my sobriety was not one of me just trying to do personal development. It was something that I genuinely took pride in, because I was like, look, like I'm doing something hard in a northern city where everybody drinks. As a club promoter on the front lines of party culture, I have managed to stay sober. And it sounds like such a stupid thing to be proud of, but it was. And I needed things to be proud of. And doing a hard thing, a hard habit, lifestyle habit, that was one of the first really difficult things that I did. You know, since then, whether it be challenges in the gym, whether it be 500 days without caffeine, whether it be building up a meditation, like nothing could be harder than being a club promoter in one of the biggest party cities in the UK and trying to go sober. So it really was a great introduction for me. And like I say, I highly, highly recommend it to people. If they want to make a big change, you'll make tons of development.
I definitely hear you on that. When you say you're the only guy not drinking and you're the club promoter in the biggest club, I don't know if you know this, but Korea is actually number 1, I think, when it comes to global alcohol consumption. So everybody drinks.
No way.
So, and I think that's a bit of a stereotype about Korean guys, especially through Korean dramas and things like that. So I actually don't drink. But imagine you're living in a country where everybody drinks. And so even when I go to Singapore, it's like, hey, where are you from? I'm like, oh, I'm from Korea. And they're like, yeah, but you're not drinking. Like, yeah, I don't drink. It's like, I've never met a Korean guy who doesn't drink. And so I think it comes with a lot of impediments. So for example, even when doing business deals, you have to drink. And I'm like, hey, sorry, I just don't do that. It's kind of hard sometimes to put your foot down, and people are like, oh yeah, but just have one, even as a sign of respect to the elder, right? And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I just still can't drink.
Times are a-changing, man. The way that people perceive alcohol, particularly, especially in the West, is changing massively. It's called the low and no movement, low and no alcohol. And the number of people that are low and no now, even at 17, 18, 19, 20 in the UK, dude, I couldn't have imagined going sober at that age in the UK. Are you crazy?
Right.
No way am I going to do that. But now these kids, it's not their drug of choice. And yeah, it's interesting.
So when did you start like seriously thinking about podcasting as a career path? Is that something that you thought that I mean, did you know you would be where you are today? Because sounds like you're only going to get bigger from here.
As a career path, it's really only been in the last 18 months that I've believed that I can properly do this. When I first started out doing it, it was the first thing I'd ever done in my adult life that wasn't a commercial venture. Everything I'd done up until that point had been because it got me either more status or got me paid. So I was doing modeling for both of those reasons. I was doing club promoting for both of those reasons. I was doing DJing for both of those reasons. And I just wanted to have conversations with people because I loved podcasts. I loved the conversations that I listened to. And I figured if I had my own, I could basically pick my own guests and talk as much as I wanted, and it would be mine. And I did. The start of February 2018, I decided to start, and we are now 615 episodes deep and 200 million plays and 100 plus New York Times bestselling authors. But there was no point up until COVID. It was literally just a side project. Then COVID happened and it shut down all of the nightclubs. So I figured, well, I need something to pile this obsession onto, so it might as well be the podcast. And I'd already started to feel a little bit discontinuity with the nightlife stuff. And then, yeah, the COVID happened, and I just really decided to turn pro. So there's a book called Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield, which is a chapter expanded out into an entire book from his original book called The War of Art. Both of these are about 90 minutes long each to either read or listen to. I highly recommend that people go and check them out. It's amazing. And in it, he talks about turning pro, and he talks about all of the things that a professional is and all of the things that an amateur is. And a professional is the sort of person who tries his hardest, who turns up on time, who makes sure that the preparation is done correctly. And I realized that this resonated with me because I'd always wanted to dedicate myself fully to a craft, but I'd never had a craft. And I'd always wanted to be able to build an undeniable stack of proof to base my confidence on. But when I was doing it with a business, my imposter syndrome and my lack of self-belief was so strong that even if the club night was successful, I would have always been able to excuse it by, oh, well, that's because the market conditions were right. Or, oh, well, that's because we timed it appropriately. Or, oh, well, that's because we've got a really great team. It wasn't because of me. It wasn't because of my skills. So I was always able to explain away why success had come to me. But finally, I had an outlet where my performance and what I did was directly, linearly, one-to-one tied to the result on the other side. And I thought, wow, well, this allows me to break through some of this lingering imposter syndrome. Because if this goes well, it wasn't because of anybody. There's no one else in the room. It's just me, right? It's me that chose the guest. It's me that researched the guest. It's me that asked the questions. It's me. And I really love that. I love the fact it's one of the things that I think the athletes that are listening have a massive advantage as, which is your success and your failure is yours to bear, right? In team sports, it's slightly different, but even then you can have, look at Michael Jordan, right? You can have a massive impact on a team as a single player. Being able to have agency and sovereignty and control over your successes and your failures is something that some people don't want and some people flourish with, and it turned out that that was something that I always wanted and I didn't know. And yeah, it got towards the podcast get maybe the back end of the first year of COVID, so start of 2021, something like that. And it started to get to the size where I thought, well, this is making more money than the nightlife stuff, and I don't have to be awake until 4 a.m, 2 or 3 nights a week. And I love it. So why wouldn't I decide to go full time with this?
And is that sort of the point where you decided to relocate to Austin, Texas, or you were already there?
No, so that was, I'd been thinking in my mind that I loved American culture for a long time. I said that I'd taken a bunch of different trips out here. I ended up coming out for a variety of reasons, mostly modeling jobs and other bits and pieces. And while I was out here, the country just really spoke to me. I loved everybody that I met. The culture's phenomenal. And I started to think, well, if you're going to make a go of this podcast thing, you can be wherever you want. The current center of the universe for podcasting was in Austin, Texas. Rogan had just made his move. You had a ton of other podcasters here, a bunch of friends that I'd connected with through the show. And then the US opens up travel from the Shenzhen zone, which was shut for basically 2 years. It opens it up in November, start of November 2021. And within a week, I was here. And I spent a month in Austin, fell in love, went back to the UK for Christmas, and then came out at the start of 2022. And I've basically been here full time ever since.
And when you talk about that network of all the podcasters, I mean, we're talking like the biggest names, right? Whether it be, Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan, Andrew Schultz, and did you guys already kind of like know each other? Do they know of you even from before?
No. So all of those would have been through once I moved out to America. I had a very small circle of people that I knew before I moved out here. But within a month of being out here, I'd been on Tim Pool's show, which was massive. That had nearly 500,000 live viewers watching that particular one episode, live, concurrent live viewers, terrifying. And then, by the January time, we brought Peterson on, then we did Huberman, then we did Jocko, then we did Schultz, then we did Goggins. In that, I'd been on Rogan's show. It was a very good year. Last year was a very good year in terms of making connections and bringing people on. But they like having conversations, and I'm always going to be interested to talk to these people. So yeah, it's a really beautiful community to be a part of. Like, everybody's so kind and so nice, and however cool you think these guys are, behind the scenes they're even cooler. And it's great, man. It's great. It's really, really lovely to turn your idols into your rivals and then turn them from rivals into your friends. That's one of the coolest things that you can do.
Yeah, I guess because we're based in Asia. We don't see that many. Number one, podcast is still not very much of a thing in Asia. So there's like a massive future potential there, which is why I think guys like Spotify, they're just building their offices here, and yet maybe because of the language barriers and because it's kind of hard to have subtitles. Predominantly like English audio podcast. So that's sort of one of the challenges we're trying to overcome. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the reason I feel like I already know you guys is because I just listen to you all the time. And it's just such this podcast thing is just amazing how you can listen to long form conversations, whether it be 2-3 hours, and another thing, maybe that's not taking off as much, because in America, you got to drive everywhere and you just have to listen to something. But, I think in Asian countries, maybe because the public transport or everything is just so optimized, the dense population, so you don't really spend as much time traveling. And people are constantly watching YouTube anyway. So, from a strategic point of view, I don't know how big podcasting is going to be in Asia, but they're trying to build this whole ecosystem. Yeah.
If we can ruin the public transport network, then maybe podcasts will grow. I don't know.
Maybe. So, in terms of your area of interest, I know that especially even one of your recent episodes that I've seen with Mike Thurston, and you guys talk a lot about just just being that role model for young men. What do you think is like the biggest challenges for some of the biggest challenges for young men in the West? Like, what are some of the unique challenges that they might be facing due to changing cultural circumstances? And maybe we can compare that to what young men are going through in Asia and to see if there are any similarities there.
I would say young men are struggling in the West because all of the traits that previously they would have found pride in are now tougher places for them to stand firmly. So, for instance, let's say being a protector or being a provider, saying, if you were to talk about that, if you were to say that you take pride in doing that as a man in the West, there would be a number of people on social media and in the mainstream press that would say, what do you mean protector? Why should women need protecting? Why do men need protecting from men? Is it not the problem of men? Is it not because they're tyrannical and they're overbearing and they're too aggressive already? What about providing? What, do you think that women should be back in the kitchen? You think that women shouldn't be able to provide for themselves? Oh, you want to be able to hold women for ransom. You don't want women to have independence from you. Right. So anything that you posit as a plus for men is immediately lambasted as you trying to take that away from women or some other sort of group. And because men have had it good for so long, supposedly, apart from all of the ones that died in war or battle or that were doing dangerous jobs, of course, or that were incarcerated or addicted to drugs or et cetera, because some men have had it good for so long, a lot of people are prepared to turn a blind eye to the suffering of men.
Right.
And one of the primary challenges is they don't know what they're supposed to do anymore. They don't know who they're supposed to be. They were supposed to be a provider and a protector, but both of those things have been outsourced now. Women out-earn men between the ages of 21 and 29 by £1,111. They're going to university. 2 women for every 1 man will complete a 4-year US college degree by 2030. Men are retreating from the workforce at 0.1% per month since 1950, from a high of 87% down to 67% now. By 2050, that'll be 65%. So, protector.
I just love you have all these stats at the back of your head.
Okay. You've got to be prepared. So, my point being that men don't really know what it means to be a man anymore. I don't even know if that's a question that like a statement that makes sense. But to find pride in something that you have a disposition toward doing is very difficult. So in that Mike Thurston episode, you'll have heard me tell this story, but I think it's worth telling again, which is 2012 in Aurora, Colorado, and the Dark Knight movie premiere is happening. A guy who's age 27 enters the movie arena through the back, and he starts shooting rounds just into the crowd, spraying bullets into the crowd. 3 men, aged 24, 26, and 27, threw their bodies on top of their girlfriends to use them as shields. All 3 men died. All 3 women survived. That, to me, is part of an epitome of benevolent masculinity. It's men. This isn't them reverse engineering how to be chivalrous. They haven't thought to themselves, what is the right code that society wants me to do? What, you mean that they went through all of that processing during the time that someone's firing bullets into the crowd? No, this is an instinct that is deeper than that, right?
Yep.
Like, that's benevolent masculinity, the sacrifice of yourself for others, doing hard things, being independent, courageous, competitive. It's someone who doesn't give up easily, someone who stands up well under pressure, who takes responsibility, who's emotionally mature. Anybody that says to me that those are the sorts of values that we need to get rid of do not have the same vision for humanity that I do.
But who's saying that? Who's saying that we should give up those values, as every trait you just mentioned, which to me sounds like inherently natural biological instinct that men have, but who's saying that we should be giving up those values in Western society?
Anybody that's ever used the word toxic masculinity on the internet, because toxic masculinity is a way to accuse any behavior that you find offensive or just unpleasant by a man of being some embedded patriarchal superstructure that they are infused with. It's like original sin from the Bible, right? It's like a personal curse that you have. there are a huge number of people on the internet that basically say, I mean, you can see street interviews where people are asked, what are men good for? What is it that men are good for? And people, including men, won't have a good answer for this. What are women good for? Oh, women, and you can load off. This isn't for me to say that people have some sort of prejudice toward men and women. Most of these people have just been absorbing a culture which immediately says women good, man bad. Not even necessarily that. You can split it up by further minorities, like racial minority of men good, white man bad. But even within that, Asian men are getting thrown under the bus when it comes to especially education and achievements in school, because you guys overperform. And that's seen as a mark of your privilege in one form or another. It's got nothing to do with how hard you work. It's got nothing to do with the values that you're raised with. So there is currently a challenge for men to feel like they can be proud of themselves. And here's the thing, right? Let's say that you put this forward to the most ardent critic of men, that someone who is kind of pointing the finger. And you said, well, look, what do we think about these values? They could say, well, I'm not trying to get rid of those. I don't want to get rid of those, even though, every observable metric and headline in the mainstream press suggests that those things aren't anymore praised for men. The bottom line is that men do feel lost. So no matter how you get there, the net effect is that a lot of guys in the West at the moment don't feel like they have a massive role that they can take pride in. They are falling behind in education. They're falling behind in employment. They are struggling to get a partner. They are spending more time alone. They are retreating from the real world. In 1990, the average number of men percentage-wise who said that they had 0 close friends was 5. In 2020, that number is 15.
Wow.
It's tripled the number of men who say that they have 0 close friends. Men are suffering massively. And the main problem that you have with this suffering of men is that it is invisible and worthy of zero sympathy by most of the people who are in a position to create cultural trends that could fix the problem.
I suppose to play the devil's advocate, the whole term toxic masculinity, at least how we come across that term, isn't it mainly addressing, let's say, a kind of like in a workplace or something, like by this dominant boss who try to take advantage of the weaker type of female employees or something like that, and maybe that term is now kind of all just. It just became this all-inclusive, broad thing. But I mean, what was that origin of that word toxic masculinity? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so toxic masculinity was originally a term used in academia. It was used, I think, on average 5 times up until the year 2016 in obscure academic journals. And it was used to describe incredibly violent inmates that were using their masculinity in ways that were oppressive, tyrannical. And it got picked up by the mainstream media, and it was very quickly changed to a catch-all term that just describes any behavior by a man that you deem unpleasant or offensive, right? And dude, there are many malicious ways that masculine traits can be acted out, but the term toxic masculinity is pointless and counterproductive because the framing alienates the majority of non-violent, non-extreme men, and it repels boys and men from a conversation about what it means to be a man, particularly mature and immature masculinity. So toxic masculinity is like original sin. It's like saying, if you weren't so male, you'd be okay. And the idea is something like, how can we say that accusing someone of having something toxic inside of them that needs to be expunged or exercised, like, is it any surprise that, oh, you're inherently wrong? There is something in your makeup that is making you bad. How can we be surprised that men feel lost? And dude, don't get me wrong, like, there are ways that masculinity can indeed be toxic. The Me Too movement was a much needed redress for men in positions of power who were using that power and were being abusive, manipulative, tyrannical, dominant in ways that absolutely needed resetting. However, there is absolutely a way that the use of the term toxic masculinity can go too far. So I've got a list actually here of some different headlines that have been in the Western press over the last few years of different things that are toxic masculinity. So the financial crisis is toxic masculinity. The election of Donald Trump was toxic masculinity. Not wearing a mask during COVID, eating meat, physical fitness, fast food. Capitalism is toxic masculinity, but also communism is toxic masculinity. Hip hop is toxic masculinity. Smelling of Axe body spray is toxic masculinity. Being stoic, risk-taking, religion, but also secularism and atheism, playing board games, being interested in cars, and saying hello or have a nice day, all examples of terrible toxic masculinity.
Okay, I feel like you're just making it up right now. Are you just reading up?
These are all headlines from the Western press that have identified those things were called toxic masculinity over the last 5 years.
But how? I mean, what? How is playing board games and just like, focusing on your fitness? How is that?
Smelling of Axe, but how is smelling of Axe body spray toxic masculinity? I don't know. I mean, you would have to ask these people. The point is that anything that you don't like that a man does that is offensive or unpleasant is toxic masculinity. And what's the story that tells young boys and men? It tells them that there's something wrong with them inherently. Meanwhile, they're exiting employment and education. Meanwhile, they're making themselves even less appropriate partners for women. Like it's not good. Like telling men that toxic masculinity is the reason that they don't have room to express their feelings and the reason that they're lonely and inadequate is the same as saying you're lonely and suicidal because you're toxic. You should stop that.
So we come across this term like incel often. So is that like actually a serious issue in the West? This type of, like you just mentioned, loneliness, and they just want to isolate themselves, and they kind of swear off any they become involuntarily like celibate, right? So
well, remember that the in incel is involuntarily. So voluntary celibates would be the ones who actually recant spending time in the world. The incel would be someone who actually desires a relationship with a woman and is struggling to get it. There is a huge increase in the number of sexless men. So 2008, you had around about 8% of men between 18 and 30 who haven't had sex in the last year. 2018, only 10 years later, that number has more than tripled from 8% to 28%. From 2018 to 2023, it wouldn't surprise me if that number's over 50 now, given the pandemic. The most scary statistic that I've seen was in 2019, 61% of men aged 18 to 30 said that they were looking for a casual or long-term relationship. In 2023, that number's dropped to 50%. That's only 1 in 2 men aged 18 to 30 say that they're looking for a casual or long-term relationship with a woman. Oh, a casual or long-term relationship, full stop, actually. That covers all different sexual orientations. For the men who are listening, who have been between the ages of 18 and 30 and understand the God-shaking power that the male sex drive can enact during those times, can you imagine how bad life has to be for you to say, I'm not looking for a long-term relationship and I'm not looking for anything casual either? 50% of men aged 18 to 30 said that.
Wow, that's pretty shocking. And why do you think they're saying that? What are some of the contributing factors?
Okay, so I think we can't deny the fact that there are biological changes going on. Reduction in the quality of drinking water, reduction in the quality of diet, reduction in connection to the earth, reduction in training, time outside, vitamin D from the sun, etc., etc. All of these are tanking testosterone in men. I don't know what's happening in the East, but in the West, men's testosterone levels have dropped by 1% per year since 1980. So if you want to get testosterone replacement therapy here in the West, all that you need to do is go to a doctor, get them to take your bloods. The doctor will use the normal range for male testosterone from 1960, and unless you are some absolute genetic freak, you're going to be below it. You're going to be outside of the normal range because comparing anybody to 1960 is going to fall through the floor. So that's one thing. There are a ton of psychological and sociocultural factors that are also causing men to have this reduction in mate-seeking behavior. I think that social media has an awful lot to answer for. I think it's causing everybody to be less social in the real world. It is giving us all the opportunity to do something that isn't go out and deal with the messy interaction of trying to find a partner or even just a friend. I can just sit here on my phone. It's comfortable. It's convenient. It dampens the pain of rejection, the harsh sting of someone saying they don't want to be your friend or they don't want to go out with you. You don't know how many people swiped left on you. So, whereas if you go up to somebody in a bar and they say, I'm not interested or whatever, then that's going to hurt. You also need to pluck up the courage to say to say hello to someone, as opposed to just swiping right. So everything has been optimized for convenience. That's another part. Social media, massive increases in social anxiety, which means that even if you do manage to get yourself out of the house, your social skills, you're like me at age 13, your social skills have atrophied so much that you have no idea how to speak to a person.
Wow.
Porn, massive, massive impact, I think, on male mental health. There are some interesting stats that suggest that porn use itself isn't necessarily correlated with superb negative outcomes for men's psychology, but the story that they tell themselves about their porn use is really, really destructive. And one of the common trends on the internet at the moment is that you shouldn't be using porn, which means that men that do use porn, a lot of the time, if they're from these internet subgroups, feel quite disgusted at their own porn use. And that can cause them to feel shame and guilt around it. The no-fap movement, which you might be familiar with, where guys abstain from masturbation, they abstain from using porn. I think that this is sedating men's sex drive. It's causing them to get a very, very small amount of sexual satisfaction through the use of porn, through the use of these like online accounts. And that means that they don't need to go out and find a mate. If all that you're left with, if you're some caveman 15,000 years ago and you just need to have an unbelievable imagination and that's the only way that you can get yourself off, you're going to be more motivated to go out and find a mate than now, especially if you can be easily distracted by social media and you can have porn that's on hand at any time. And then video games. Video games also are a massive, massive distractor for men. It allows them to use that status-seeking, goal-oriented behavior, the obsession that me and you have, praised. It is absolutely part of achieving success in the real world, but it can be hijacked by success in the virtual world, which means that all of the desires that men have in order to be able to push forward, they want to be part of a group, they want to achieve goals, they want to do hard things, they want to be dedicated. Well, yeah, but all of that can be achieved from the comfort of your couch.
Right.
So all of these things are hijacking the existing status-seeking, reproductive, and goal-oriented behavior that men have, and they're just moving them from the real world to the virtual world. They're taking them from the classroom to the couch, and it's causing men to lose motivation, and it doesn't surprise me.
I mean, and to think that we haven't even entered the era, the AI and VR era of porn and things like that is scary. That it's because it's only going to get worse from here then.
So there's one little white pill that I could give people around VR that me and a friend came up with, and I do think that this will be not insignificant. At the moment, it's very difficult to work out how to flirt with somebody else for both men and women, because women aren't having a great time either. It's bad for both men and women at the moment. And the other thing is, if one sex loses, both sexes lose.
Exactly.
On average, it's men and women that are pairing off one-to-one. And for all of these guys, for every one guy that retreats from the real world into porn, video games, and social media, there is a partner that would have been theirs that sat looking around wondering what's going on.
Right.
So not good for women either. But yeah, it's a real challenge, man.
Do you think this is inevitably contributing to the inequality of, because the so-called the top 1% of men the so-called top Gs, right? They are the ones then that will be cleaning up, and that results in sort of like more inequality, because there's like 99% of the guys that are either incels, or they're just losing interest, period. Then there are like this one top percent guys that every woman just like gravitate towards. So how do you feel about that phenomenon?
I don't think that it's nothing. I think that you're right to identify the fact that there is a small cohort of desirable men that most of the women seem to be putting their attention toward. There is an effect called hypergamy, which is women tend to date up and across. They tend to want to be in a relationship with a man who is at least as educated, at least as wealthy, with at least as much status, and at least as tall as them. So I've called this the tall girl problem, right? You can imagine, as we have 2 women for every 1 man completing a 4-year US college degree, as you have women out earning men by around about £1,000 per year between the ages of 21 and 29, as you have this ever increasing cohort, there's 7 million men in the US who are unemployed and not looking for work. 7 million men between the ages of 22 and 40 and 55. These are prime working age men. 2/3 of them live in a household that's claiming a disability benefit. There is a massive cohort of men, and they spend on average, this same group of 7 million men, on average spend 2,000 hours a year playing video games, and 50% of that time is either on prescription medication or while smoking weed. 2,000 hours a year is a full-time job.
Yeah.
They have a full-time job playing video games, right? So you have indeed a large cohort of men that are just exiting the world at large. Downstream from that, many of them are exiting dating. They are concerned about the fact that women seem to have standards that are unreasonable. The problem is, because women tend to want to date across and up, they want to date someone as employed, as educated, as statusful, etc. As women start to rise up through their own competence hierarchy, there are fewer and fewer men across and above from them, right? If women go up and men go down, you have an ever increasing cohort of women competing for an ever decreasing cohort of men, which means that there is a small pool of turbo Chad guys at the top and a large pool of women that want to get with them. That means more casual sex, because the women need to play the game of the more rare sex, right? It's something called the sex ratio hypothesis. Women will play the game and play the rules of these men. These men will quite happily use and discard those women because they have a wealth of options. These men at the bottom are forgotten and alone and wistful. These women that do get used by Turbo Chad and then maybe discarded afterward, they smear all men with the brush of, well, all men are players, they don't treat women appropriately, etc., etc. So there's a group of guys that go, hang on a second, I didn't even get a chance here.
Right.
You're saying that guys are toxically masculine and treating women misogynistically. I didn't even get the chance to treat a woman at all. And these women, it seems, retreat into careers. They kind of recant family life. This is one of the potential reasons that we're seeing a decrease in birth rates at the moment.
Which is a huge
Correct.
issue in Asia right now.
I can't wait to talk about this with you. Then the guys are retreating into porn and video games. The Turbo Chad guys at the top, I don't think it's necessarily good for them either. Like, if you offer a 2-year-old child as much ice cream as they want every single night for the rest of their life, it's not good for them. It might be what they want, but it's not good for them. Exactly. And the same thing goes for the men. Men weren't evolved to have an endless list of women that they could have access to. So I don't think it's particularly good for anyone. And I need to make the point again, I'm not laying this at the feet of women and saying your standards are too high. We have demographic changes that are occurring and sociocultural changes that are occurring, which is allowing women and encouraging women to outperform men in education and employment. They have an inbuilt preference for men that are like that above and across. And it's just the natural outcome of this changing in the dominance and in the prestige that each sex has. It's brutal to think that women who have spent, the last 50 years finally getting themselves into employment and education at the same level that men do, now find themselves struggling to find a mate for precisely that reason. That you could spend a decade doing an undergrad, then a master's, then a postgrad, then finally getting into a business. And you turn around and you go, okay, well, I'm 30 or 31 now as a woman, and I'm competing with a female barista who still lives at home with her parents and is 20, someone who's 11 years my junior, but to a guy is equally attractive. The bottom line is that men don't value education and employment in women. It's like 10,000 times less is how much they value it. It's basically, it's not a factor for them. Now, they want smart, they want clever, they want kind, they want funny, they want, all of that. But they're not bothered about education and employment. So women are investing an awful lot of time, quite rightly, into something that they had restricted from them for an awful, awful long period. However, it's making their dating chances more difficult, not better. For every 16-point increase in a woman's IQ, her chance of marriage goes down by 30%. For every 16-point increase in a man's IQ, his chance of marriage goes up by 35%.
Where are you getting these statistics from?
All over the place.
Right.
So the IQ one, that's quite an old study now. The stuff to do with retreat from the workforce is a bunch of Pew data. It's everywhere. I'm just living and breathing in journals at the moment.
Right. I could totally imagine what you're saying right now could be misconstrued. It's like, oh, does that mean that women shouldn't be educated? And
Correct.
Because I'm sure you get that a lot as well, right?
No, to be honest, I work very, very hard to try and be as reasonable and gentle and compassionate as I can whilst putting this across. The only time that I ever get negative pushback is if it's on a 60-second TikTok or a short clip or something.
Taken out of context.
There's not enough time. Yeah, precisely. There's not enough time for me to give the whole thing. But dude, like I am all for trying to bring women along for the ride. Women need a man that they can respect, that they like, that they're fundamentally attracted to, and men want a partner as well. Men and women aren't each other's enemies. And I'm saying, like, screaming it from the rooftops, this isn't good for women. This isn't good for men. I'm not saying women need to go back into the kitchen and not do degrees anymore. But the fundamental ground truth of hypergamy is that women on average want to date a man who's at least as educated and employed as they are.
I don't think anybody would argue that fact, though.
No, and so like you start off, there's base. Women on average want to date a man who's as educated or more educated and as employed or more employed. Okay, roll the clock forward. Then you have an increasing cohort of women out achieving men. Okay, that means there's more women and fewer men. Like, just run the time forward. You can see what's going to happen. It's evident the way that this plays out. Am I saying that this means that we need to grab women by the collar and drag them back out of areas that they literally only just got access to over the last 50 years? Evidently not. No, I've never once said that. And I think, hopefully, the way that I put this across is one that doesn't trigger a defensive response from either men or women. Guys are having a really bad time of it, but women aren't having a fantastic time either. We're looking at the birth rates. Japan's birth rate, South Korea's birth rate, 0.8.
It's the lowest in the world right now. The lowest.
Tell me what's going on. I need to know what's going on in South Korea. Why do you think that you've got a 0.8 birth rate?
That's something that we ourselves question even living in this country. Number one, guys are exiting the dating market, right? And economic conditions that, just so everything is expensive. It's just too expensive to raise a family, to get married. And there are all these subtle pressure that if you get married, guys are the ones that's supposed to buy the house, have the house ready, which is impossible to have if you're like a 30-year-old guy and average house pricing, you'll never be able to afford one in your lifetime. As a guy, you cannot bring a house to a marriage. Then that'll be a pretty demotivating factor for you to say, yeah, look, I can't afford to get married. So that's the most common thing we hear. I cannot afford to get married. And this is relevant for countries like Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, where you do have compulsory military enrollment. So you have to serve in the military if you're a man. So they automatically end up losing out 2 years of their life.
What I'm fascinated by in your story there is that there is this odd blend of traditional value, which is the man is supposed to pay for the house, with modern value, which is men are falling behind in education and employment. Now, we don't have that in the West because the tradition of men are supposed to be the protector and the provider has been heavily eroded. So I read an article a little while ago, the 4B movement. A growing movement of women is saying no. No to heterosexual marriage, no to childbirth, no to dating, no to heterosexual sexual relationships. They are choosing to stop the patriarchy and instead leave it behind. This is an article from thecut.com. When things fail in the dating market or in the world in general, you're going to end up with people trying to cope in different ways. You know, they will retreat into conspiracy, they will retreat into misogyny, they will retreat into extreme feminism. Yeah, dude, I mean, I'm fascinated by the potentials of demographic collapse.
It's a real issue. I think this whole threat of underpopulation, not overpopulation, is I think it's going to be catastrophic. But then I don't think that's the mainstream narrative at all right now.
If I was to be concerned, or if I was to predict what I think will be the main set of headlines over the next 25 years, it will be declining birth rates and it will be empty cities. China looks like by 2050 it's going to be 650 million people.
Oh man, it's crazy.
By 2050, dude, within our lifetimes, there's going to be 600, half the people. China, Japan also, I don't know the numbers for Korea, but Japan, I think, is about 120 million at the moment. That's going to be down to about 60, 65 million by 2050. I asked, so Stephen Shaw is a guy that's been on my show. He's a demographics researcher, lives in Japan, phenomenal guy. He taught me what will happen to countries when demographic collapse occurs. So it's not like 50% of people will be removed from every city. It's that people will migrate from quieter cities and towns to less quiet cities and towns. So you will just end up with ghost towns. You will end up with these areas where people used to live and now no one lives. And if you think that having a planet where there are too many people on it is a bad idea, wait until you see what a planet like with too few is. It is absolutely terrifying. We need GDP to grow. We have an embedded growth obligation, right? Like that's the way the entire global economy is based on growth. Maybe, I hope this isn't the case, and I don't do fear-mongering much, but there may come a time where there are too few people to literally bury the bodies. Like where there are too few people to look after the elderly, to give them the care that they need, nurses, doctors, assistants, carers. Like, dude, it's really concerning. And yeah, you're right. You know, if you have a popular country like America, you can drive immigration, which kind of artificially inflates the numbers and keeps it going. But the global number overall doesn't get fixed by that. You're just borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, as we would say in the UK. And even the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, you know, Chad, Nigeria, Ethiopia, these places that you think, oh, unbelievably high birth rates, each woman is declining one child per woman is getting removed every 15 years. So it's 7, then it's 6, then it's 5, and that's every 15 years. That's how quickly, precipitously the drop-off is.
I didn't feel this until it actually happened to me. So when I was in elementary school in Korea, there used to be like 40, 50 students in one class, and there used to be about 10 to 12 different classrooms. So if you're looking for the whole year, we're looking at hundreds, right? I literally got told this last week that the same elementary school that, remember, we had 50 students in one class, times that by 12. The entire year, they just had 10 students come in. 10 students, which means that at this rate, my elementary school is gonna disappear. Because how can they run the school when they're like the entire year, the new incoming first grade is like 10 people, 10 students.
Dude, that's wild.
It's real, it's happening, and I think we should all be terrified.
It's not good. It's really not good, dude. Now, that being said, some white pills, it's not a real existential risk. A real existential risk is permanent, unrecoverable collapse, and humanity will be fine. But it's not nice over the next few years with regards to that. Can things be done? Yes. I think educating, especially women, on the limitations of fertility treatments. IVF is phenomenal, but it's not a miracle. If you are 42 and a woman and trying to have children for the first time and you don't have any fertilized eggs, it is going to be tough for you. And there are support groups for these women who wanted to have families and never got round to having them, and they grieve for families that they didn't even get to start. And it's brutal. It's absolutely awful. Again, this isn't me saying the only way that you can be fulfilled as a woman is to have a family. Not at all. But my point is, if you want to have a family, thinking about starting it sooner rather than later is probably a smart idea. Redressing some of the challenges that we're seeing in the mating market through encouraging people to date in person. I think encouraging women to see motherhood as a role which is one that is worthy of praise and admiration. You're literally making the next generation of our children. Encouraging men to see a protector and provider role as not something which is either stupid and boring because I can just get the government to pay for me while I sit on the couch and play video games, or misogynistic and patriarchal oppression. Like, if we can split the difference between those two and say, maybe you should try and go out and get educated and earn some money. But yeah, dude, it's a real concern, and I really hope that we manage to fix this problem.
Kind of to finish off my previous thoughts, do you think that this whole phenomenon, like this, radical feminism and just this pushback against toxic masculinity, do you think that that's almost like an overcorrection of all the past injustices that they supposedly faced? So in everything, there's cause and effect. So for example, if there's a far right movement, it'll result in this like a woke thing that just gets out of control, but then so it overcorrects, but at some point it's gonna swing back and we reach some sort of like an equilibrium. What do you think about that?
I hope so. I hope that that's how it ends up. But I think it's fair to say that the Me Too movement sought to sanitize some of the toxic elements of men's behavior.
Right.
And instead what it did is it sterilized all of it. It just removed anything that men tried or decided to do. And again, it was done, I think, on average with mostly good intentions, that we need to protect women. We need to call powerful men that are abusing that power to account. Fuck, all on board. I'm there, right? It's when we swing too far, how much baby gets thrown out with the bathwater? How much of this did we actually end up needing? And will there be a recorrection that is more balanced? Maybe. I would say that we're starting to see, for instance, with woke, I think that we've already passed peak woke. I think that people are starting to realize that a lot of these ideologies don't really make sense. They're inherently self-contradictory. Again, there are many, many minorities that need raising up, but very few of them need patronizing. And that's the promise that was given with this. The same thing goes for women. So let's use an example of Hollywood movies, right? If you look at Mulan, the animated movie from, I think it was 1997, 1995, something like that. In the original Mulan, the female lead character tries to join the army, and she struggles because she's smaller and weaker than the other soldiers that she's with. However, through working harder than everyone around her and being more innovative, she's able to use her size to her advantage, and she's quicker and more agile. She overcomes all of these obstacles, and then she becomes a contributing member of the group. Roll the clock forward 20 years to the live action remake of Mulan, and what you see is a girl who joins the army, doesn't have to overcome anything except for the expectations of mostly the men that are saying that she can't join. She doesn't have to do anything. She goes through no training. She's just inherently better than all of the other people around her because of some magical estrogen chi or something, whatever she's able to enact. What is the story that tells women? It tells women you shouldn't ever face hardship and be innovative and compete. It's that if the world ever restricts what you are doing, it's because it doesn't judge you. It doesn't like you as a person. And the way that you get back at it is by being catty and sarcastic, and any challenge that you face is because of an injustice, not because challenge is the way that the world is built. And the worst thing that it does is it teaches women that they are inherently fragile, because it doesn't show young girls role models of, here is how someone that you could look up to was facing a challenge and overcame it. That's what, and so you go, okay, well, is it any surprise that you have a victimhood culture moving forward when this is the world that people have been promised? Like, it doesn't surprise me.
One question that I have, when we look at all these young men that are exiting the dating market, or they just become lost, where are the fathers? Where are the father figures? I mean, isn't it kind of dad's job to instill the right type of, like, belief, and then, hey, son, get your shit together type of thing?
You would hope so. I certainly think that there is a fatherlessness epidemic that we have at the moment. What is it? 60%, 70% of marriages ending in divorce currently in the West. It's not great. I don't know the stats, so I'd be getting out over my skis if I was to tell you that I know how many of these men are coming from fatherless homes. But what I can tell you is that the ascension of people like Jordan Peterson, podcasts like mine, are speaking to a generation of men that need some sort of role model. They need someone. Men are going to look up to somebody. And if you don't like the current role models that are being put forward for men, you have to offer other ones. You can't say, we don't like them and we can't be bothered to provide you with any other ones. That's not the way that this works. You need to offer something up. I think that there's definitely a challenge between our generation and our parents' generation, because it was such a right turn in terms of culture and technology. My parents didn't grow up with social media or the internet or mobile phones or Tinder or OnlyFans or Instagram or porn or video games. Okay, so they can teach me some things, but they can't teach me everything. And that means that I need to find someone that I can relate with more effectively. So even in a whole home that's got mum and dad's trying his best, but the rules that dad learned don't apply to this crazy new alien world with phones and all the rest of it. So I think we are maybe paying the price for such rapid technological change and such rapid cultural change. Getting a job for life as a father. Here's a perfect example, right? I was the first person to go to university in my family.
Wow.
In the space of me leaving university and coming out the other side of university, university is now the thing that is done for suckers, and everybody should go and try and start an entrepreneurship and just become an internet millionaire, right? So in the space of time since I went to uni and left, which has only been 12 years, uni has gone from being something that nobody had done, in at least my family, and most people at my school hadn't gone and done, to now something that nobody should do because there's easier ways and better ways to make. So that is the sort of pace that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Unbelievably quick. So how are we supposed to keep up with these rapidly changing rules? And, well, you need someone to come in and offer you guidance. And that is where role models, for better or for worse, are going to step into that vacuum.
I think in Asian countries, we're definitely lacking that type of role models. At least in the West, there seem to be a few, but in Asia, it just, I do think that there's this vacuum, and people are just looking for somebody to look up to. That's why, like Jordan Peterson's video actually gets translated into Korean, and then people just listen to that.
Are you concerned? I know that in China they were concerned with the feminization of men, and one of the but in China specifically, they banned K-pop for that reason. I can't remember what they called it. I think it was girly men was the translation, that they had these men that they didn't think were, virtuous, sort of stoic, masculine, typified males. is Korea in any way at the forefront of, or is it being very progressive with like gender identity, gender roles for men, the way that they present, the sort of values they have? Like, why is it that you think, again, I'm seeing conservative values, men are supposed to pay for the house, but also you're saying we're struggling with the patriarch, Jordan Peterson father figure. I'm just trying to work out how all of this fits together.
Yeah. The point about K-pop being banned in China is an interesting one. I think just based on my understanding, the main reason for that is political. When Korea, for example, had this complicated relationship with North Korea and being the allies of the United States and Japan, and I think they wanted to sort of build this like missile defense system in Korea to kind of counter China, and China kind of got pissed off about it. It's like, hey, you can't do that at our doorstep. So I think this whole like a THAAD situation was what resulted in that ban of Korean content. But that being said, if you live in cities like Beijing and Shanghai, the Chinese government is not worried about those people. They have too much money, and they use VPN. They can access anything and everything, Netflix, Facebook, Korean content. I think the reason for Chinese like hardcore policy about the censorship and things like that is mainly to make sure that the people from rural areas like farmers, that there's no uprising because of this massive growing inequality of income inequality and wealth gap.
Interesting.
So basically, you've got to hold these people kind of, okay, everything's fine. There's no civil like crazy disobedience. We'll look after you. But people that are living in Beijing and Shanghai, they got too much money to lose, and they're like, you know what? Just let us do what we do. We're not gonna do anything against the government, so they can access anything and everything. That's why even when you do street interviews in China, people are like, oh, you guys must be bought by CCP, or you need to look for their permits. I'm like, no, like seriously, they're relatively free in that sense. What the government, what the CCP is worried about is mainly the rural areas, because China is so big, and history-wise, it's been such a short time that they were disunited against like any foreign attacks, because they've been colonized by the French or Japanese. So I think they're like enjoying this prosperity. How long that gets sustained remains to be seen. But bottom line is that Chinese people can watch whatever Korean content that they want, whether it be Korean dramas, whether it be the feminization of male type of and whether K-pop is at the forefront of it. I think it's debatable. That being said, yeah, there are some really, really good-looking guys in Korea, so I can't compete.
Yeah.
They're just too good-looking.
Yeah, interesting. That's fascinating.
Just on a side note, that these are the kind of conversation that we get to have, even about political stuff, rather than having to listen to BBC, CNN, Fox about what's happening, at a geopolitical level. When you ask questions and I can tell you what I know, and I ask you questions about what's happening in the West, this feels just so much better. And I just wonder if it's possible to kind of just expand on these type of independent creators / podcasters, so that they can communicate with each other, and we are seen as sort of the leaders in this space, that those that are listening or watching can kind of discover the real Asia or the real West this way.
Yeah, I think the legacy media is going to die one generation at a time, because your media consumption habits are based on really what you did up until the age of about 30. And you look at your parents. My mum uses a radio in her car. I haven't heard the radio in forever, right? There's certainly some things that the mainstream media can do, which are boring reporting, digging into economic reports. Not everything is worthy of a social media presence YouTube video. There is a big foundation of just boring grunt work reporting that has to be done. I'm not going to do it, right? None of my friends are going to do it. You're not going to do it. Cool. Let them crack on with that. But I think especially the last few years, especially through COVID, the legacy media didn't do themselves any favors in terms of their reputation, in terms of their reliability, in terms of their rigor and what people thought of them. I wonder whether or not they can win that back. I'm not sure, but I certainly know that my consumption of that kind of media is essentially zero now. The only way that I ever see anything the mainstream media does is when it's clipped and put onto my side of the internet. So yeah, it's and that's the game. That's the game now. That every single other media organization is trying to play the game that every creator watching this is already playing. They're trying to win on Instagram. They're trying to win on TikTok. They're trying to win on YouTube and on blog posts and on articles. They're trying to get shared on Twitter because that's where the interesting eyeballs are. That's where the growth is at the moment.
But I think that's what's so good about talking to somebody like you is that we're constantly willing to learn, improve, and adopt better habits, or just get on with the latest technology. So I think as long as we keep that up and then we continue to have honest and open conversations like this, I think that gives me hope.
Absolutely, man. And here's one thing that might be interesting to people actually that they can use as a little tool. Changing your mind or admitting that you're wrong is one of the most important skills that I think that anybody can learn in the modern world. Having loose opinions strongly held, i.e. not knowing what you're talking about, but being unprepared to change your mind about what you're talking about, is destructive for society, and it is regressive for you personally. It's going to cause you to die on the hill of an idea that you can barely describe, as opposed to being open and curious about the world, about what's going on, wanting to find out because you want to seek truth and you want to fully understand the very brief amount of time that you've got here on this planet. Like the best description of wisdom, given that my show's called Modern Wisdom, the best description of wisdom that I've found is working out what's true, right? Working out what is really true in the world. And for me, that is the most enjoyable way to go about seeking development for myself, because it stops my ego from getting too big, keeps my ego nice and small. If I have to admit, today, really perfect example, I thought that it was the girly men thing for China. You have updated my operating system now, and I go, wow, maybe what I heard, which makes a lot of sense given the corners of the internet that I go into, right, that China are these sort of upstanding, hard, manly, we don't take any crap from the woke people. Oh, maybe it's not. Maybe it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So I need to now think about that entire world that I've got put together. Brilliant. Well, that's interesting. And by doing that, it means that you never get caught up in believing your own bullshit too much. Because if someone has a strong opinion on the other side and it convinces you, you go, wow, what else am I wrong about? Probably loads of things. So I'll keep on trying to find out how wrong I can be as often as possible. And like I say, for the people who love finding out new stuff, that's a good heuristic. Try and be wrong as much as possible.
Yeah. I have this favorite saying of mine that as I age, I just feel like I don't know anything.
Yes.
Yeah, I just feel dumber as I age.
The older I get, the less I realize I know.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. That's a much better way of putting it. I feel like you must be just so full of all these quotes and these type of things you just came up. Are you writing a book or something at this point, or?
I am writing a book, which will be around challenges in the mating market.
That'll be interesting. Yeah,
I can't wait. So that's been co-authored with the #1 evolutionary psychologist on the planet, a guy called Dr. David Buss, who's out here in Austin.
Wow.
He's a phenomenal academic, stellar career. And we're really loving working together, which is fantastic.
When's that coming out?
That'll probably be the start of 2024. We're working hard on it at the moment. It's a big beast because it's such a multivariate problem, and it's so important that we want to give it the work that it deserves. I don't just want to, we could crack this out in a couple of months and it would be okay, but I really want this to be a landmark opportunity. I want people to feel less alone. I want them to feel the tiny bit that we've gone through today, the tall girl problem, for instance, if that helps one well-educated, rich woman to realize why she might be struggling to find a partner, and it's not because she is somehow insufficient or broken or doomed to be lonely.
Right.
Look, there's big forces, bigger than you. Big forces are happening and changes are afoot. Okay, well, oh wow, maybe I'm okay. Maybe I can try and work around this. And understanding is the first step to finding a solution. So yeah, I can't wait for that to come out. In the meantime, I'm just going to continue doing the show. I absolutely adore the conversations that I have. It's 3 episodes a week, so it keeps me busy. I've just been through a ton of travel so far this year. I've been to all over the place, the Middle East, back to the UK, LA, Vegas, Miami. So I'm looking forward to a period of having a routine for a little while.
Well, you gotta at some point come to Seoul, Korea, or I have to visit you in Austin. It's one of those places I've always wanted to visit.
I would love to do that.
That would be so cool.
I would love to show you some barbecue and play some pickleball with you.
That's awesome. I guess any last words for our viewers who any tips or wisdom you can share?
You cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything. Almost everything that you are being distracted by is probably not worth your time. And one of the most important things that you can do is work out in advance what sort of life you want to live like and work backward from there. If you work out, this is the sort of end that I want, what are the steps that will get me there? Or an even easier way to do it would be in 1 year's time or 5 years' time or 10 years' time, what would have had to have happened for me to look back on this period and consider it a success? Just tell me. The entire world is at your feet. You can build a business, you can build a family, you can go off on your own, you can travel the world. There are some restrictions you've got, right? You can't break the laws of thermodynamics. You're not going to be able to fly. You're not going to be able to time travel. But broadly, you're living in the best time ever for anybody to be alive in history. You have the fortune of being on this planet, and you're going to die soon. Use the time wisely. I would say for women and for guys who are distracted by the vanity of social media, by objective metrics of status and wealth, your looks and your status are a depreciating asset. Your mind and your insights are an appreciating asset. You should invest your self-worth wisely. You should not be investing your self-worth into something which you know is going to fall away over the next few years. And if you're 25, 30, 35, 40, and the thing that you take the most pleasure from is how hard you can drink or which clubs you can get into on a weekend or how good looking you are fighting a losing battle, because that is going to be something one day you're going to wake up and you're going to be defeated by someone that is younger with more energy and more VIP passes than you have. So, from somebody that was on the front lines of the clubbing culture, I take such a greater degree of satisfaction from the work that I do now, from learning about myself, learning about the world around me. And one final thing that I often rely on is if you are suffering, if you are struggling through hardship and trauma, this is what hard feels like. Doing things that are worthwhile are hard. Getting through things that are tough are hard. And this is what hard feels like. This isn't some personal curse that's been bestowed on you. This is a challenge. The challenge will be over relatively soon, and you will look back on it with pride, with satisfaction, the fact that you managed to survive it. Every single challenge that you've faced up to now, every single thing you've got through by virtue of the fact that you are sat here listening to us talk. So all of the things that you stayed awake at night for, the neurotic thought loops, you were adamant that this was going to be the end of you and that your everything was going to come crashing down around you, and it didn't, because you're still here. We suffer far more in imagination than in reality. And almost all of the things that you're adamant are going to be terrible, awful, destructive ends to your life or everything that you care about, you're going to be fine. It's just going to hurt for a little while. So just dig in. This is what hard feels like. And on the other side of it, you're going to be satisfied.
What a perfect note to end on. And I think people really needed to hear that. And one day I wish I could be as articulate as you are.
This is my first language. I only speak one of them, not two.
Chris, thanks for your time. And yeah, hope to have a chat with you in person soon.
Dude, I really appreciate this. Your insights are great. I love the show. Keep on crushing it, man.
Thank you so much.